Okay, everybody, thanks for coming to class. Today we have a guest speaker. We're very fortunate to have Stef Ashton. Stef and I used to be colleagues at Kwantlen Polytechnic University. Stef is a 25-year veteran of the RCMP, and she worked for over a decade, 12 years now, I think, at KPU, and also is working on her PhD at UBC. And today, I think you're going to be talking a little bit about police deviance, right? So take it away, Stef.
Hey, everybody. So we're calling it police deviance, but we're I'm hoping to take you on a little trip here. And you are allowed to interject, disagree, disregard all you like. I am a retired police officer. I don't care if you're committing a crime right now. As long as no one's being hurt, we're all good, okay? So very different role than what I had. I'm happy to be on the other side, to be honest, but I do need to maintain my security clearance for my PhD, so at least for a little while. So I titled this lecture, and normally I have 3 hours to teach a lecture on this for my students because our structure is a little bit different, so I may rush through some stuff, and then if we end up totally getting off track and we don't get through the slides, that's okay too. But I titled this, When Good Cops Go Bad, because what I'm going to propose to you is this. We have terrible hiring practices in policing for what we actually need in 2026. And sometimes we hire people and then we don't take care of them and then they go off the rails. And then we don't know how to support them once they're off the rails to get them back on the rails. So those are kind of two areas that I want you to be thinking about today. And I normally ask my class, this lecture is part of a course we call Intro to Policing, which is a 2211 or a second year course. And I often ask my students, who here is here because they want to be a police officer? I'm not going to ask that because I understand there's a lot of psych students in the room. If you are interested or have questions about that after, feel free to approach me. But it doesn't matter to me why you're in the room, just that you're in the room so we can talk about this stuff. So I'm going to do a little land acknowledgement. And my reason for doing this is that we have worked very hard at Kwantlen to indigenize our curriculum across the board because we are a criminology department. And I feel like the connection to improving relations with Indigenous folk in an area that they are highly affected by is really important. But you'll notice my land acknowledgement is a little bit different. So today I join you from the unceded lands of the Tsawwassen First Nations. I live in that area. I just took the ferry over this morning. I do have a house here in Victoria as well. What I like to do is acknowledge that we're going to ground ourselves in knowing and understanding the part that we play in, hopefully at this point in our lives, improving culture and lifestyle for Indigenous folk in Canada. Because you know how we do those land acknowledgements? Well, you know, we live, work, and play on the unceded territories of such and such. Well, the elders at Tsawwassen told me, make it actually something personal. That's more important to us than if you just say which land you live on. So I came to you from Tsawwassen, but I come to you also with a desire to be collaborative as a settler who wants to work with these communities in collaboration to improve life for them under their terms. That is my land acknowledgement as a settler. My history is Scottish, Welsh, and Irish. I am a colonizer. But today we're going to talk about police officers. Someone who does precision guesswork based on unreliable data provided by those of questionable knowledge. That's just one definition. See also wizard or magician. You'd appreciate that, Mike. And then just to kind of ground you a little bit more, I'm going to throw up a slide here. That's me. That was taken in 2001. I was a school liaison officer in the city of Coquitlam, British Columbia. That young guy you see there with me is my now 27-year-old son, partner to my daughter-in-law who's joined me today, Sophie. She's an alumni of UVic, so we're going out later, so I just hopped over, so we've got a date. And you can just see the ears there. That was Ranger, my rescue dog, down there at the bottom. I had literally been able to come home for lunch because I lived about 5 minutes away from where I worked. And you can see how happy Ben is to be sitting on my gun belt. Ben's 6'1" and 200 pounds now, just so you know. He doesn't look like that anymore. Okay, so what to expect from today? Just so you know, I'll make my slides available to Michael for you to have if you want them. So if you don't like taking notes, you can just sit here and stare at me. If you do like taking notes, I'm a note taker, so I totally get it if you want to. I don't know if this is going to be on a test. I can't promise you.
Let's put on the top.
Here's some things I really want you to be thinking about today. What does it mean to defund the police? What does that really mean to us? And maybe that'll come up in our conversation today. Maybe you'll have some ideas about it. Sophie's already got an idea. Go for it, Sophie. Speak up.
No, it's so funny because my background is actually in marine biology. Having a mother-in-law 10 years now that talks a lot about these things. I think the main understanding that people have about defunding the police is stopping policing. For a lot of the time, it's more about a reallocation of funds, meaning that maybe if there's a mental health check, for example, it would be maybe better to have resources and funding going towards someone like a nurse or a mental health advocate that can be on site for those experiences. Anyway, my main point to be fund the police can definitely be a misunderstood term, whereas the way I like to approach it is more of a reallocation of the funds.
Excellent way of putting it. It's reallocation, putting the money where it actually belongs. We were just talking about this in the hallway. How many more hires do we need to have for the UVic police before we feel like we're safe? I can promise you there will never be enough. The chief of police will go to the city of Victoria every year and say, we need more. The population's growing. Crime is getting worse. But if you haven't already been told this in another class, putting boots on the ground does not solve crime. It just moves it. So the same amount of crime will be happening. What we do know statistically, if you guys are doing any research, Stats Canada is a great resource. Our most recent stats tell us that violent crime is on the rise. That should concern us. More people are dying, more people are being seriously injured from crime, but less crime is happening. I would propose to you, okay, I get it that you guys have something you really need to do, but if you have to have a conversation about it, take it outside. Okay? Thank you. I'm a little ADHD and it's disruptive to me. Sorry, I am a university professor. I'm used to it. I'm totally off track now. Stats Canada, let's go back to that. So we know violent crime's on the rise. What I really wanted to talk about was, who here is familiar with the dark figure of crime? Anybody know what it is? Not a soul. The dark figure of crime, this would be a good test question. The dark figure of crime is the crime that is not being reported to police. And what we are seeing is a rise in the number of people who don't bother reporting crime. So anybody here had their car broken into? Or their parents' car? Did they report it to police? You didn't report it to police. Why not? So the other piece to that is, if you didn't have enough stolen that you could even do an insurance claim, or there was no damage, then what's the point in wasting my time telling the police about it? Why are they going to care? Well, here's why they care. Because maybe there were 6 break-ins on the same block, and the type of tool used to do the break-ins could be attributed to a certain individual that they're aware of, who they know has just gotten out of jail. Now, I know that doesn't solve the problem, but at least they probably could start heading in a direction to say, maybe we can stop you from having your car broken into. It's a real catch-22. Somebody gets out of jail, they have nowhere to go, they need to survive, maybe they have addiction issues, and now they're breaking into cars to get money to be able to survive. But you as a student also need to be able to survive and not have to pay $500 deductibles and other expenses for when your car is wrecked. I had my car broken into once, long before I was a police officer, and I mean, they took the whole ignition out. They weren't able to steal the car, by the way. Toyota Tercel, 1982, I think it was. Very, very good little car. So I want to mention those 2 things as we head down this path, and I know it seems like they're not connected to what we're really going to talk about, but it's going to make sense in a little bit, hopefully. And if it doesn't, you can let me know. So I like to put this up here because for those of you who don't know, police have a ton of power. Anyone who wants to argue that with me, feel free. I do think that the police forget how much power they have. Their power is rooted in our criminal code and in our Constitution and our Charter of Rights. They have powers written right into that. There are limitations on those powers, but here's the challenge. Written into this, while not explicitly in the criminal code, discretion is at the heart of how police do what they do. In other words, they have the ability to say whether they're going to investigate something. And it doesn't necessarily have to be, it's not a criminal offense, I'm not going to investigate. It can be, well, there's not enough evidence to show anything happened here, so we're not going to investigate. For those of you that do any work around sexual violence, you may be familiar with a newspaper coverage called Unfounded in the Globe and Mail by Robin Doolittle, where she talks about the number of sexual violence cases reported to police that were written off as unfounded. Now, unfounded, I don't know if you're thinking about what does that actually mean. What it actually means is this didn't actually happen. In other words, we don't believe you. In fact, these things possibly happened, but there wasn't any way to investigate for whatever reason. And the police were misusing the term unfounded, thinking, well, I am not able to find that it occurred, so therefore it's unfounded, when in fact what it was under investigation permanently. There's no statute of limitations on sexual violence. You never have to close the file. But what Robin Doolittle sussed out of that was police were writing them up as unfounded and walking away from these files so they didn't have to look at them again. Anybody think that's a little bit of a misuse of their discretion? I certainly do. In fact, nobody, for the most part, I'm going to give you a fact that might surprise you. 80% of police officers are pretty much okay people. They're like you and I. They want the right things to happen. They want to take care of people. That's why they do the job. 20% of them, absolute assholes. Those are the ones you have to worry about. Anybody met one of those assholes? I worked with many of them. Yeah. That person that maybe stops you on the street, they, for whatever reason, are an asshole. We don't know why. Or maybe they just came in that way. But this is kind of what I want to get at today is they have this, the assholes have the discretion too. The difference is you'll see the good police officer or the police officer who's trying to be good and maybe doesn't understand how to be good, and I'll explain that in a minute. They're using their discretion to try to do the right thing for people, whether it's to be able to continue with the criminal offense or to get them the resources they need. Because police officers have been tasked with a whole bunch of other stuff that isn't police work. Only about 10% of their actual job is going to crimes and arresting people and, honestly, driving fast and putting the lights on and stuff. That's all kind of fun, but you don't do a lot of that in police work. You do a lot of paper writing, a lot of dealing with conflict. And conflict might be two neighbors fighting over where the line is on the grass and who's cutting it. That's a lot of the kind of stuff that police will get involved in. The idea being that maybe you resolve that or help the person resolve it before it turns into a Donnybrook on the front lawn of somebody's house and someone gets seriously hurt. And now it is a criminal offense. You spend a lot of time trying to prevent crime from happening if you're good at your job. If you're an asshole, you jack those two people up and end up in a fight on the lawn with them. And then now you're under an independent investigations office investigation. Which, by the way, I think was the best organization they ever created because the police should not be investigating themselves. They need good investigators to do the work, but they shouldn't be investigating themselves. So if you're going to talk about how police behave, take it back to this idea of discretion. And for those of you that are psych students, what might be interesting for you if you find this particular area of interest to you is to look at how police use their discretion. How they use it when they're a brand new officer, how they use it when they've have 10 years of service and maybe they've been in a really rough part of Canada and now they're back in BC and they've got a nice cushy job in North Bantam and they're screaming at people when they should be able to have a conversation, but they've got trauma and they've got PTSD and they've seen things they shouldn't have seen and nobody has addressed it. I kind of want you to be open to this idea that police don't always automatically end up being assholes. And for what it's worth, I'm going to be honest with you. By the time I was ready to retire and had 6 months left before I did, if I was sitting at a table with an asshole, I wasn't afraid to tell them. Actually, I'd never really been afraid to tell them, but at that point I really didn't care. I would call them out on it because I was in a position that I could do that. Not every officer who's working with an asshole can. And I hope, sorry if I offend anybody by using the term asshole. I promise not to swear too much. So, here's further on this idea of discretion. They have discretion over how they describe the nature of the incident. So let's think about what I just told you about this idea that sexual violence was being written off as unfounded simply because they weren't able to move forward with the investigation. And this could include things like the survivor shows up at the police station, gives a statement. In the statement, they say they think it happened Tuesday night around 9 o'clock, and they think it was with this person. Police start to investigate, and that person says, I was nowhere near there at Tuesday at 9 o'clock, and here's proof that I wasn't there at that time. Well, in fact, trauma can cause issues. Maybe it actually happened at 10:30 or 7:30, and he was there then, and it did happen, but because she is committed to saying, or she or they have committed to saying 9 o'clock, the police are now saying, well, we can't prove that it happened because you told us the wrong time, so you must have been lying. We don't believe you. So they have a say in whether or not they do investigate based on the nature of the incidents, severity of the offense. They have the power to use restorative practice, alternative measures, even in cases involving adults. They are able to consider public interest. In other words, how do we investigate this? So your car gets broken into in 2026. You go online to Vic PD or whichever, we live in Saanich, but whatever detachment area you live in, whatever region you live in, you go onto your little site there and you'll get an online reporting form. It takes about 15 minutes to fill out. You put in there, my car was broken into at 6 a.m. this morning and I lost, 6,000 cassette tapes or whatever the heck it is you have in there that's missing. And you send it off through the online system, and a couple days later you'll get a police file number, and that's it. You never interact with a police officer. Not even once. And maybe you need that because you are going to go for your insurance, so now you've got your police file number. That's all insurance cares about. So they can choose whether or not they fully investigate those or settle for sending you back a police file number, and that's it. You get logged into the system. 2 years down the road, the file gets purged from the system and you never see it again. No investigation whatsoever. It's really more of a process because there's so many of them. They can consider community or environmental factors. And here's what's important about this. Just to give you some context, let's think about the situation on Pandora. We were just talking about this in the hall, and it irritates me how there's this very sort of clinical, we got to go in, we got to clean this up, people are afraid to be on the street, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And yet we know from research that for the most part, these communities don't really interact with the rest of the public, other than to be seen by the public and maybe act in a way that the rest of the public might say, oh, you don't like that. Well, we're a tourist town, so we need to have it all pretty and nice for our tourists to see. They don't need to see this. There are people that go to the downtown east side for a tour just to see what it looks like. But these are people that are not really interacting with you unless you are in a role like Michael does some advocacy and some work with these communities. So he's interacting with the unhoused people down there. You might interact with them because you're standing on the same street corner, but that might be it. Yet, are they really causing a problem for us beyond being unsightly and maybe they don't clean up their garbage as much as people would like? I promise you the rats are still going to be there whether they are or not. I promise you, this is an ocean community. There are rats everywhere. Hate to tell you that if you didn't already know it. They are not the reason the rats are there. In fact, the rats are probably staying away from where they are. So somebody at City Council, somebody in the community, the privileged community that originally started Victoria is in City Council yelling at them about how they want to know their streets are safe. They want to be able to park their car on the street and not worry about it. They want. They pay the taxes. That leads to the city councilors making decisions around how to keep those people safe, that group of people that live in their apartments and their houses. And so we have to clean up this mess. Yet, the unhoused community is also a community in the same area and really isn't consulted about it. So the police can choose to clean up that mess based on what the city of Victoria, the city of Saanich, what our officials say, because that's who pays their salary and directs what they do. The RCMP is a little bit different. Anybody lived in an RCMP jurisdiction, like West Shore? Where are you from? Okay. So, there you are. I mentioned North Vancouver. So you come from a community where the RCMP is actually guided by their national mission, vision, and values. In other words, what the federal RCMP sets up as being the priorities. And then within that, they can set provincial and community priorities as well. But ultimately, the RCMP can always fall back on, actually, we're supposed to be doing gangs and federal crimes, so we can't really deal with that for you this week. And there's all kinds of different crimes that happen. Gangs are a big one. They can choose based on what the community is asking for. And if you're good at this, if you're a detachment commander or a chief of police who actually gets this, you will take all of these factors into consideration and try to find the best solution for the whole community, not just for the ones that are saying, we pay your taxes. I promise you, more than once in my career, somebody said, I pay your salary. And I'm like, actually, no, you don't. I'm actually paid by this body, not by that body. So, you hear that, you know it, but are we actually using what we might call discretion that would be appropriate in 2026? I check my time because I know I'm going on. I don't have that many slides. So I also threw in here, just so you're aware of it, because I know that, how many people know what Section 25 refers to of the Criminal Code? That is the section that gives the police the authority to use force. Now, I mentioned off the top this idea of power. Who here thinks the police have a lot of power? Good answer. They do. Who here thinks the police take advantage of that power? Yeah. No doubt. And if for anybody that has a parent or a relative who is a police officer, I think you'll find that they might even understand what we're talking about here. We're talking about something very specific, and that's use of force. So use of force tells us, and just so you know, this is a whole separate lecture, but just for the purposes of understanding how it relates to this idea of deviance, use of force tells us that the police have the power to use as much force as is necessary. Anybody want to take a stab at what necessary is? Don't be afraid. Go for it. Perfectly said. So I'm a 5'8" woman. I'm reasonably strong. But if I'm going to come across, and I have and had to, there's 2 times in my career where I thought I might not make it home. This was one of them. Twins, 6'4", 250. We picked them up at a local bar in Coquitlam after they threw a glass at the bartender and did some other drunk stuff. I'm first on scene, so I want you to imagine use of force in this context. I'm first on scene, and there they are walking right in front of me in the hotel across the street. So I pull my police car in, not that one, but one that looked just like it, and jumped out of the car and went, stop police. By the way, we don't say stop police anymore. What do you think you want someone to do when you're a police officer and they're moving away from you? You want them to stop, right? So if you say stop police, they hear police but not stop. So now we say, police, stop. I know, right? That's actually in the use of force guides and how we train to say police, stop. So I say stop police because it was still 1996. And they both stopped. And then I went, oh shit, come back over here and put your hands on my police car. Whenever you're dealing with people, you always want to see their hands, just so you know. If you ever get stopped by the police and they're saying, show me your hands. We've all seen the TV shows, right? In the States where you put your hands on the steering wheel, my gun's in the glove box, my other gun's in the back seat, whatever. I'm sorry, I'm being American now. But they put their hands on the steering wheel. Well, we're not quite there, but we do look for hands, right? Police officers are looking for your hands because if they can see your hands, they can see you don't have anything in them. I said, put your hands on the car. They both walked up and did exactly what I asked. Do you think I needed to pepper spray them or pull up my baton or anything? Even though there's 500 pounds of man standing in front of me, I'm by myself at this point. Did I need to do anything else? They were fully compliant, doing everything I asked. No need to use more force, but here's a key thing that you need to understand about force, which may relate to how you feel when you come across a uniformed police officer. Police presence is use of force. Police presence is use of force. I don't have to say a word to you as a police officer. If I'm standing there in uniform, I am using force. I am letting you know I have more power than you. So the two guys did everything I asked until we got back to cells, and then I learned a lesson about twins. Drunk twins who are 250 pounds and are looking for a fight will fight even if they think it's the stupidest thing they've ever done. And we ended up in a giant fight in cells with the two of them. I'm on the guy's back that I had arrested, who, just so you know, the entire way back to the office, he's in the back of my police car and I'm driving along. I was like 29 years old at the time. And he's in the back seat going, you know, you're really awesome. You're really pretty. Why can't I meet a girl like you? Are you single? In the back of my police car. So you can guess how drunk he was. Get him back to the office. I can see that his circulation in his hands is being cut off by the handcuffs. So I make a decision. We're now in cells. His hands are white. He's a big guy, big meaty hands. I'm not going to ask if anybody's ever been handcuffed, but if you have, you probably know what it feels like. It's not pleasant for anyone, but if you've got really big wrists, it can cut off your circulation. So I said, you've been good. You've been fully compliant, did everything I asked. No need to use any force other than my voice and my presence. Sat him down on the bench and said, I'm going to take the handcuffs off, but just stay here till we're ready for you. We were dealing with his brother. And it was actually his brother who made the decision to fight. He actually, as he was being walked down the hall. Now, just so you know, they were being held for investigation, but also because they were drunk. They would have been released in the morning, and if there were no charges to be pursued, they would have been released with no other conditions. But in this case, he's about to be walked down the hall.
They had been released with a record or no record?
In this case, the bar did ask for charges because it turns out they'd assaulted 3 people. So there was that investigation was ongoing, but they would have been released the next morning regardless. Neither one of them had a criminal record. At any rate, at least not yet. As the guy walks, the twin brother, whose name for the life of me I can't remember. I only remember my guy, and their last name sounded like Jurassic Park. So that's how I remember them, as being the 2 dinosaurs from Jurassic Park, because their last name was very similar to that. So basically, he walks past my sergeant, who's 20 odd years of service, very experienced, not a huge man, but he knows how to take care of himself. He literally takes a swing at my sergeant as he's walking past him, knocks him into the stainless steel countertop. And when I looked over, my sergeant was in the fetal position on the floor. And just so you guys know, I'm studying brain injury as part of my PhD. Somebody in the fetal position on the floor after having their head hit has a serious concussion, possibly significant head trauma. He's in the fetal position on the floor and the fight's on. I am behind the counter because I'm the only girl there, so I'm the one that's typey, right? I was also a journalist, so I type fast. That's why they actually have me doing it, not because I was female. But I go now around the counter to my guy, who's 5 minutes ago he wanted to date me. Now he wants to kill me. And I'm on his back trying to get control of him, and he's banging me into a wall. He's got another female member that ran in, hanging off an arm. And we are literally trying to get this guy under control. I've pepper sprayed him, 0 effect. I used pepper spray twice in my career, never works. Not until an hour later, and then whoever has it on them is crying like a baby. But at the time, no reaction whatsoever, because you can push through pepper spray. Right? So, needless to say, finally, the big guy that I worked with, who used to be a bouncer, walks in. He uses a technique to get control of the situation, and we end up with him on the floor, and then we get him into a cell. And then the first thing he says to me is, never deal with 2 brothers when one's not put away. And he was a bouncer. He knew that these 2 would back each other up, even if one thought the other one was wrong. I didn't know that. Even at 29 years of age, I'd never experienced that. So I'm telling you that story because I think what it tells you is use of force applies in all situations. And you saw what happened there. We went from fully compliant. I don't need to be hard. Baton's not out, pepper spray's not out. I'm not ready to go with these guys. I literally said, put your hands on the car. And they did everything I asked. And just to really give you context, I was driving a Crown Vic, which I know you guys don't know because it's really old, but they have big back seats, like big back seats. And it took me and one of the guys to push and pull to get my guy in the back of my police car. He wouldn't fit. That's how big these guys were. Use of force is all about what you personally perceive as a threat. So even though I'm 5'8", and I am reasonably tough, I would rather talk to somebody than fight with them. And honestly, I rarely had to engage in use of force beyond police presence and communication in my career. Because most of the time you can talk your way out of these situations. Every once in a while you can't. That's what use of force is about. It's not about 8 VPD guys jumping on some guy and him ending up dead. And that's happened more than once. And I say VPD just because the Gary Miles case has been in the news a fair bit. And if you guys are interested in understanding use of force more, look up the Gary Miles case. That one even went so far as the entire department refused to provide statements, which in itself is a crime, as far as I'm concerned. But I'm going to talk to you about a specific case in a minute. But I do want to mention here, I said to you, sometimes we hire bad people. Very embarrassing, but it happens. Sometimes people become damaged over the course of time. And so I use this. So this actually is part of a bigger lecture, and I'm going to talk about what it gets into. But these are, when I talk about discretion or decision making, these are the things that police officers often consider when they're talking about how they make decisions and use their discretion and how it can change from shiny new officer to seasoned, crusty, salty 25-year member. Core values. There are set core values in every police agency, but I don't know if people actually understand them. For the RCMP, for the longest time, it was honesty, integrity, professionalism, accountability, respect, and compassion. It's changed a bit. I just remember that from in my own recruiting days. Pretty good values to have, but do people actually really understand? And those values, those core values, are what you're compared to when you're applying to a police force. So if you are interested in policing, make sure you actually look at what the core values of the police force you're planning to apply to are, so that you understand what that means. Integrity is massive. You cannot give somebody back their integrity once it's been taken away from them. So if you lie on the stand and get caught, you can never testify in court again because no one will believe you. That's your integrity. And it happens. It happens because police make mistakes and then it gets put into case law, and it happens because people actually lie for a number of reasons. Discretion is a factor. We've talked about at length. Job satisfaction. Do you guys honestly believe police are happy with their jobs right now? There is not a police agency in Canada that isn't desperate to hire more people, which means everybody who's working is overworking, doing overtime, extra shifts, taking on extra work. They're stressed out, they're overloaded. If they've got any service at all, they've probably had some experiences that have made it harder for them to do the job, and they don't have time to recover from it. And I'm not making excuses for them. I experienced all of that too and managed to retire without being an asshole. At least I think I wasn't an asshole. It's debatable. Ask my kids. What about the supervisor? What if your supervisor's an idiot and they're telling you to do things that you don't want to do? Here's something to remember, and you can do this anywhere. If somebody asks you in the course of your work or life to do something that you don't agree with, write it down somewhere, what you actually wanted to do, document, this person told me I had to do this, so I had to do it. Because in the long run, what you actually think is going to be a factor in how something like that might play out. But you can have bad supervisors. Your attitude towards the public is going to shift, and there is nothing you can do about it. You can't just say, oh no, I'm still going to be joyful and happy. Honestly, when I had 18 years of service, I would still go out on the road as a road supervisor, and I would practically be skipping out to my police car. And people are like, How can you still be this happy with your job this far into it? I'm like, we get in this car and we don't know what's going to happen for the rest of the day. And that excites me. I love that about this job. I loved the variety of the job. I love the interaction with the people, with helping people, with solving problems. I loved my job until the day I didn't anymore, and then I retired. But I also knew it was time for me to go. So attitudes towards the public. Not everybody has that happy, let's hit the road and have a good day kind of attitude. I'll give you an example. So I was working general duty in Richmond Detachment. It was 2012, and it's a day shift on a Saturday, sunny day, beautiful out. Wonderful day to be working outside. And I was a supervisor, so I could pretty much go wherever I wanted and do whatever I wanted at that point. Well, a call came in that this is when medical grow-ops were in existence before the legalization, but medical grow-ops existed, and there were some in Richmond. Somebody had called to complain that one of the medical grow-ops, or somebody with a lot of pot, was venting in the condo complex that they lived in. And they were complaining because it was really strong. So one of our constables started to head that way, and I said, oh, hey, I'll come join you. And the response I got, we went to another channel, and he just said, oh, hey, you don't need to. I just phoned the guy. I said, pardon me? You just phoned the guy? Yeah, I just phoned the guy. I said, oh, okay. Well, let me know if you need anything. I needed some time to think about that. What do you mean you just phoned the guy? This kid had like a year of service. What do you mean you phoned the guy? What kind of investigation is that? What kind of interaction is that? How is the person who complained about it going to feel knowing you phoned the guy? And really, what's that going to do? You don't know for sure that he was even venting. It may have been a neighbor dispute, and this person may have been harassing that person. You don't know. So when we met up later, I said to him, tell me about why you phoned him. And he said, well, I figured he could just shut his window and that would solve the problem. I said, yeah, but how do you know what the problem actually was? He's like, what do you mean? I said, well, we know that some of these grow-ops have a history of overgrowing. In other words, they're growing hundreds more plants than they're actually entitled to grow under their medical license. So do you know if he was overgrowing and that might be why the venting was happening? Well, no, I don't. I said, exactly. Did you check the parking lot for vehicles associated to gangs? Because we also know that some of these guys they use a non-criminalized family member, and then that family member is not even actually living there. They're running the grow-op. Did you check for vehicles associated to gang members? Well, no, I didn't. I didn't actually go there. I said, oh, okay. Maybe next time think about these things. And he went, okay. And then we separated. About an hour later, he called me and he said, hey, I went by and I talked to him. You're right, he had too many plants. And he was using a venting system that he shouldn't have used. The strata is going to talk to him about fixing it. He may actually lose his place because he's not following the rules. None of that was criminal, so he didn't need to investigate that. Police don't deal with civil matters. But he could at least now write on his police file that he went there and he did the thing, and then he talked to the complainant and said, I did the thing and it's being dealt with, and you'll want to talk to your strata about your problems because this really isn't a police matter. He's really not breaking the law. I mean, there's always gray areas. Discretion, right? Remember I mentioned discretion? If you understand your authorities, you can make some decisions around, some thoughtful decisions around discretion. But if you don't understand what authority you have to be there, you can do a whole lot of trouble. Let's look at Fairy Creek. Everybody know what I'm talking about when I talk about Fairy Creek? Okay, so you're going to see it in the book. Fairy Creek is one of the major protests that has led to the police being criticized and case law being created because the police mishandled a protest. They didn't follow the injunction. They didn't know their authorities, and they screwed up, and it creates bad case law for the police and doesn't help protesters because a bunch of them were arrested when they didn't really have the authority to be arrested. So unlawful arrests. Who wants to be arrested? Nobody. I promise you, nobody wants to be arrested. So look into Fairy Creek. That's a fantastic example where the police did not understand their authorities. And I'm not just standing up here telling you this because I think I'm so smart. I actually was a division liaison who worked as a a crisis negotiator during protests to support peaceful protest, to allow people to protest in a way that was meaningful. So in other words, I had to know my authorities. I had to understand what they were allowed to do and not allowed to do so that I could negotiate with them about it and say, hey guys, according to the injunction, you're not allowed to be here, but I've cleared all of this space over here for you. You will still be visual, like part of what they want to be seen. They want the media to have access. Thank you. And time on the job, we're getting to that. So these are things that understanding that authority can help you as a police officer do a better job. But most of the time they are dealing with, 500 or 600 hours of training every year, 100 emails in their email box telling them new things they have to do, and they can't keep up with it. The last thing I have there is time on the job. Generally, we find, people in that sort of 0 to 5 years, if they're already an asshole, they're probably going to get fired. But if they're not, and something happens to them that leads them down that path, it happens after about 5 to 7 years. You can get somebody back from going down that path, whatever it might be. Either, misuse of authority, use of force, drinking on the job, whatever it might be. And I'm going to talk about that in a sec. But you can't do it if you don't step in. Go ahead.
Would you say it's also affected by what section you're working with?
Yes. I would say you can be affected by anything at any time. And what you'll often hear about PTSD is that when police officers, they can be at 50 deaths and be fine. And then they go to 1 and they're out. They literally walk out the next day and can never go back. There's a lot of research into that now about resiliency and, what is it we can do to fortify this? And I'm probably not going to have time to talk about it, but that's kind of where I wanted to go with you. So I'm going to speed up a bit. For those of you that are interested, Dr. Kevin Gilmartin wrote this book, Emotional Survival for Law Enforcement, many years ago, and has written tons of articles on the assholes and how they end up getting there. So if it is an area of interest, he's actually a psychologist, so for those of you in psychology. But I've listed off some of the things that can happen that take you down this slippery slope of corruption, leaving you ending up as a deviant cop who might lose their job. And when I talk about a cup of coffee, under RCMP policy, you are not allowed to accept gifts. Free coffee is a gift. If you're accepting it, you're engaging in corrupt behavior. And I know that sounds extreme. But if you start doing that, then it's not so much longer to go, hey, listen, I just bought this new place. Would you mind going on the computer to see if my neighbor's a good dude? And now you're checking a private system with information that you sign a document every year saying you will not search it except for the purposes of investigation. You're on there looking somebody up to see if they have a criminal record or if they have any history, and then sharing it with someone who isn't entitled to that information. It happens. Drinking in the workplace used to be accepted. About 1998, the current commanding officer of BCRCMP came out and said, no more drinking in the office. Do you think it stopped? It did not. But if you're doing that, what else are you doing? See, you kind of start with that, oh, well, I'll just accept the cup of coffee because I don't want to make a big deal out of it. Oh, I'm just checking this out because, I'm really worried about my friend and my neighbor. And you know what? Everybody's drinking in the workplace, so I'm just going to have one drink. It'll be fine. Leaving early because now you're pissed off and your supervisor has done something you don't like. So you decide you're going to finish your day earlier than everybody else. I saw this happen once in Richmond. We had a shooting at the IKEA. About 5 people had decided to leave early, and we didn't have enough police officers to cover the scene. Needless to say, those people were put under code of conduct. But they did it because, oh, well, they don't really need me, or you're angry, so you're always back at the office getting out of uniform the second you can. When you are on duty still. And in fact, when you swear the oath to be a police officer, you basically swear that you'll work 24 hours if you have to. It's part of the job sometimes. That's what you're signing up for, to take care of people. You agree to do this. Nobody should be surprised by that if you are the first on scene at a murder and they need to talk to you about it, you're probably going to be on overtime. Believe me, you get very well compensated for it. So these are things that can start to add up. And then now you're lying. And the last thing I'm going to talk about today to kind of connect you to this in 2026 is related to that. Deception, where you maybe are relying on your police file that you spoke to someone who you didn't actually speak to. And I'll explain that more in a minute. And then finally, neglect of duty. just not doing your frickin' job. I once had an officer who clearly had some issues, refused to seek help. And this is what's key here. If we're going to talk, like, people get PTSD and it may take them a while to go down the road where they want to seek help. But ultimately, if you have a mental health crisis, no matter who you are accountable for getting medical treatment. If anybody in this room had diabetes and said, you know, I'm just not going to take my insulin anymore and then I'm going to get in my car and drive, end up in a diabetic coma, crashing into some elementary school playground and killing a bunch of kids, well, do we excuse you because you chose not to take your insulin? We can't excuse people who have mental health, but we need to give them what they need in order to take care of themselves the same way we would with any other illness. I know that might sound harsh, but I've dealt with so many people with mental health issues over the years who were screaming for help and we couldn't get it for them. They didn't want to be in crisis. They didn't want to be seeing me every day, but I was it. There was nobody else helping them. So when somebody gets to the place where they're starting to neglect their duty because they're having a hard time, it's time for them to step up and say, I need help. It's 2026. Police officers are allowed to get help and not have it ruin their lives. The problem is 65% of our police officers are privileged white men. You can take from that whatever you like. This is a group of individuals who traditionally don't seek, are not help seeking. They're less likely than other people to acknowledge that they have something going on. And I'm not talking about your generation. Your generation is very different. But the people out there right now doing the job. When you leave here and you see police officers on the street, take a good look at who's in the car. Tell me if you feel like they reflect who you are in the community, because that's what policing is supposed to do. Okay, so I put this up here just to kind of finish things off and make it local. This was in the Tyee. Did anybody read the Tyee besides me? There's some people reading it, I promise you. It's an excellent publication. I'm sure Michael reads it. Advocates hope a ruling will change treatment of Indigenous witnesses. Case law was created out of this. This is a neglect of duty case. And it's actually a pretty straightforward one. So this is in Burns Lake, British Columbia. They've had some pretty horrible files. A key thing that's wrong with that detachment area is they keep losing their staff sergeant who runs the detachment and ending up with a corporal who's 2 ranks down and may not have any experience running the detachment for long periods of time. This is a person who's had no experience as a supervisor, now supervising in cases like this. This was a major investigation involving 30 to 40 people who had alleged sexual assault by an elder in the community, a hereditary chief, which, if you know anything about Indigenous communities, hereditary chiefs have a lot of respect and power, and people are afraid to come out and say things about them that are contrary. And that's why it took 30 years for people to finally come forward. In this case, what actually happened, and you can read the whole case if you like, I just put the title here for you. Essentially, the center of the case involved First Nations former students who alleged a range of serious abuses. This particular case, the person was considered an elder in the community and is actually a government official, so you will not find his name being identified. I don't know if it was, they allege that the whole thing with not identifying the offender in cases is to protect the victims, but in this case, they wanted their names out there and they weren't able to because he was protected. This tribunal ruled that the police investigators discriminated when they failed to tell the complainants what was going on. Just so you're aware, RCMP policy states you must advise the complainant of the outcome of the file. It's in policy. In other words, if you don't do it, you're neglecting your duty. And that's where people get into the deception thing sometimes. They, it's the end of shift and they don't want to wake the person up or whatever. It takes 10 minutes to write a thing saying, can somebody just call this guy and let him know what we did, if you can tell them. Again, protecting people's privacy. But what was at the heart of this was, take the statement and then ignore the victims entirely. Not trauma-informed, not thoughtful, neglect of duty. Essentially, the case law says moving forward, they need to stop doing this. And then last but not least, I put a slide here that I want you to walk away with. How do we hire the right people? And I was hoping we could have a discussion, but instead I'm just going to put up what I kind of put here as, in a perfect world, I'd like to see some of this. Trauma-informed practice, empathetic, critical thinkers. Empathetic. Critical thinking is crucial to being a good police officer. Being able to point a gun and shoot, I don't think is so crucial. Only 2% of interactions with police lead to physical use of force. 2%. Yes, they need to practice for things like what happened in Tumbler Ridge for those crises, but it's not the only thing they need to practice. They need to practice being trauma-informed. They need to be empathetic. We need to professionalize policing, which is something they're doing in the UK now. You have to have a university degree in a specific area to be a police officer. I'll stop there.
Can I ask one question? Something that you went over. What do you mean by police presence is use of force?
Okay.
If you can close on that, that'd be great.
So there's a use of force continuum, which is a circle. And in that, it has a series of things that you do in order to deal with a situation. One big circle tells us what the police action should be if they're seeing these behaviors. Inside of it is what are the environmental factors. Outside of it is what is the person doing. So you walk up and we have our two big guys who we know committed an assault, right? By the way, they were convicted of that. So yes, in fact, they did commit an assault. They threw a glass at a bartender and they assaulted two people by elbowing them in the face on the way out. So they were convicted of a common assault. They're not assaulting anybody when I see them and they're fully compliant. So there is no reason for me to be, get on the ground now, right? That's how we all imagine it goes down, right? That's not how it goes down. Based upon how I perceived the situation, I made the choice to try, put your hands on my car. They did exactly what I wanted. And just as they were doing that, I was lit up from behind by 6 police cars because everybody else got to see. So was it my excellent communication that caused them to behave properly? Probably not entirely. I had a little backup. So police presence is I arrived, they saw my car, they saw me in uniform. I said, police stop in that case instead of stop police because we hadn't changed it yet. They knew I was a police officer based on the uniform. And then I did a bunch of things after that. Police presence. There's no denying I'm a police officer. What's important about that, though, is if you are a person with mental health issues who's had nothing but negative experiences with the police, and I walk into the room, I better have a pretty good idea that you don't really want to be where I am. And that's either from how you're acting, or from what you tell me, or from just my knowledge. You know, they've told me your history and you were arrested last week or apprehended last week and taken in and then released. I'm going to know in advance that me being there in this outfit is going to be a factor that affects how you react. So that doesn't mean that I automatically jump on you and throw you to the ground. Instead, it means, hey, you know what? I'm really sorry we're meeting this way. What a great way to start a conversation. I am so sorry that we have to meet this way. I can see you're having a bad day. I can see you're having a hard time. So acknowledge the fact that me being there is part of the problem. Now, there's no choices. Is it time to do something? That was a good glitch. It sounded like a police siren. We'll leave it there. I could go on for ages. You guys are awesome. I wish we would have had more conversation. It was super short.
Thank you so much.
I'll send